Hello and welcome to today's webinar and book discussion looking at ways in which we could and should be supporting a mental health strategy in the housing sector. Today's event, sponsored by HomeLink, takes part in Mental Health Awareness Week, which is all about starting conversations about mental health. And the conversation we're starting today is all about exploring how landlords might approach building a wellbeing strategy to support residents and staff experiencing mental health challenges. And this has been a really active conversation in the sector for some time now. Current Chartered Institute of Housing President Aileen Evans has been using her presidency, which started in 2019, to shine a light on the way that the housing sector approaches mental health. Along with research into the issue, she's also worked with Mind to produce a mental health guide for the housing sector, which I would also recommend that people take a look at. Obviously, the pandemic has raised the importance of this discussion even higher up the agenda. So there's a huge amount for us to talk about today. And just this week, just to kind of emphasise why it's so important, new work by the Centre for Mental Health suggested that 10 million people in England will need support for their mental health as a direct result of the pandemic over the next 3 to 5 years. So again, just the kind of work out there showing the kind of scale of the challenge and why this is an important discussion for the housing sector to be having. And today we'll be looking at how best organisations might start approaching that conversation. We'll be exploring recent publication from the Samaritans called How to Listen, Tools for Opening Up Conversations When It Matters Most. That outlines the ways to recognise when someone might be struggling and practical advice for opening up a conversation to listen without judgment. So absolutely, we'll be talking about some of the findings from that and some of the thoughts that might prompt moving forwards too. And we'll also be taking a look at what the sector's already been doing. Obviously, there have been hundreds of thousands of welfare calls and checks that landlords have made since the start of the pandemic. So a bit of a nod to that and the learning that should be picked up as a result. And to talk us through things, we've got an absolutely fantastic panel lined up for us today. We'll be hearing from Katie Columbus, the author of that book I was just talking about, How to Listen, Tools for Opening Up Conversation When It Matters Most, published by the Samaritans. Margaret Hanson, the Chief Executive of Imagine Independence, a charity dedicated to helping people with mental and physical health issues live their lives as independently as possible. Andy Sturgis, the Regional Specification Manager of South England with ACO and HomeLink, and Amy Cheswick, Director of Customers and Partners with Raven Housing Association. Welcome all. And before we start the presentations, just a reminder to everybody who's tuning in today, thank you very much for doing so. An absolutely important and vital conversation for us to be having. But this is absolutely about what's useful to you and what can kind of prompt conversations and takeaways for you in your own organisation. So please do use that Q&A box on the screen to ask as many questions as possible during the presentations, and I will pick up on as many as we can get through in the question and answer that follows those presentations. So get typing away in that Q&A box, and we will hopefully give you some useful practical takeaways that answer the questions you've got. Please do make use of that. Anyway, that is more than enough for me. Let's kick off with the discussion. And Katie, let's kick things off in style. It's over to you. Please take things away.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm Katie. I'm Assistant Director of Communications at Samaritans and author of How to Listen, which is a book about using the Samaritans' principles of active listening to people in distress and transposing them into more everyday conversations with friends, family, colleagues, partners, neighbours, with the intent of supporting one another's emotional well-being. We have had a very turbulent year, and many of us have got a lot better at talking about our emotions. People are being told to talk more so that we can process, and therefore it's really important that we are able to listen better to one another too. Listening is a really underestimated skill, but it is so important, and it's something that we can all learn to be better at. The first thing that I think it might be useful to talk about is how to tell if someone might need to talk. It can be hard, particularly at the moment when we've been physically isolated from one another, but there are two main points to this. The first is people's behaviours, and the second is big life events. Overall, I would say to trust your gut instinct. If you're looking out for changes in people's usual patterns of behavior, then that's the biggest thing, really. If anything, if you have an instinct that something has changed for somebody, check in with them. If they're not showing up for work, if they're usually very balanced but suddenly very emotionally reactive, if they seem disheveled, if they aren't coming to the local football club or virtual pub quiz, just check in and say, are you okay? You can send a message, you can say it to them in person. But if you say, I've noticed you didn't come into work, no pressure to reply. I just want you to know that I'm here for you if you want to talk. That allows the person to think, actually, someone cares, or, yeah, maybe there is something going on that I do need to talk about. And that simple check-in can be the catalyst for them taking steps to think about what's going on for them. The other important thing to look out for is big life events. So things like moving house, going away to university, starting a new job, getting divorced, bankruptcy, redundancy, grief, anything that's a big shift in people's lives. And again, it's about reassurance that, hey, I'm here if you need to talk. It's okay to feel the way you feel. We have this very stiff upper lip British culture of repressing what's going on and saying, I'm fine. That's a red flag to me. Whenever someone says I'm fine, I think of the acronym FINE, standing for being freaked out, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. It's much healthier to express what's going on with us. In terms of behaviours to look out for, this can include people being very tired, exhausted, irritable, tearful, like I've said, a change in normal routines, using alcohol or drugs to cope, becoming withdrawn or distant, becoming angry, aggressive, or defensive, or doing things that are more risky or self-destructive. It's always best to check in. Don't be nervous of asking, are you okay? You can't do any harm. By saying to someone, you seem really troubled, that isn't going to make them suddenly feel troubled. Chances are they will really appreciate you checking in, and reaching out can really be a lifeline for someone. So I'll talk a little bit about how to be a better listener. We have these principles for active listening at Samaritans, which we call SHUSH tips, which is an acronym that goes like this. S for show you care. H for have patience. U for use open questions. S for say it back. H for having courage. These are on the internet if you want to find them afterwards. So showing you care is about giving your full undivided attention to someone as you listen to them. It's being engaged, putting away your phone, not getting distracted, using open, positive body language, and really focusing on the other person. Having patience is about the fact that it might take several attempts before someone feels ready to open up. You can't rush it. So create a sense of safety and trust and show compassion. Don't interrupt, don't cut in. You can let the conversation wind and travel until you get to the bit that might be of importance. Don't be afraid of silence. I think this is a really important one. A good pause is okay. You don't need to jump in and fill the silence, because often that's when someone is thinking about what they want to say next. Using open questions is important because it allows people to explore their thoughts further. If you say, are you okay? Well, that person can only give a yes or no answer. Whereas if you say, how are you feeling? There's no yes or no option. So they have to think, am I feeling okay? Or actually, maybe I'm not okay. So use when, where, what, how did that feel? What else happened? Where did that happen? Be a little bit careful with why questions, because we don't want people to feel judged. Saying it back is important to clarify what you've heard for both yourself and the person that you are listening to check that you've both understood. People process their words differently when they say them out loud and when they hear them repeated back. So it can be really helpful to recognise if they need to explore something further or elaborate on anything. And lastly, have courage. Don't be put off by a negative response or be afraid of silence. You cannot get it wrong if you just listen to someone. You can get it wrong, unfortunately, if you give someone advice, because it might be the wrong advice. You might say to someone, oh, I had something similar that happened to me and I found jogging was great, so why don't you go for a run? Because that's what worked for me. Then that person might go for a run, but they hate running and their feet hurt. And then they come back and they're cross with you because their feet hurt and they still have their problem. It's not the right fix for them. So let them find out their best way of coping. good listening really is about giving the floor back to the person speaking because they have something they need to get off their chest. It's not about trying to fix them. It's not about giving advice or offering a solution, which is the things that often instinctively we try and do. And that comes from a good place of trying to help, but it can be unhelpful. So yeah, don't make it about you. People know themselves better than anyone else. So they are best placed to work out for themselves what they need to do. Often they need help to remember that. So validate them, tell them what they're thinking and feeling is okay, valid, totally understandable given the circumstances, and that what they're going through sounds really hard for them. Reassure them they're not a burden and that you are there for them. At Samaritans, our aim is not to save people, but to stand alongside someone until they're ready to save themselves. So it's simply about being there in the present moment with that person and holding them in the safe space of listening until they're ready to work out what it is that they want to do next. And that's it from me.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Katie. A huge amount to pick up on in the Q&A that comes forward, and a lot of kind of questions and thoughts that's prompting for me already. So and just a reminder to everybody who's tuning in, if you do have questions, if there's concerns you've got or issues you want to get answers to, do use that Q&A box, and we'll pick up on as many of your questions and thoughts in the discussion that follows the presentation. So just a pointer for that Q&A box again. Right, thank you very much, Katie. An absolutely fantastic start. And Margaret, over to you for some opening thoughts. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin. So my name's Margaret Hanson, and I'm really delighted to be here today. I'm the Chief Exec of Imagine Independence. We're a charity that works across England, but we are based in Liverpool unusually. And the reason for that is that back in the mid-70s, some concerned citizens thought that people at the time living in asylums could probably have a better deal if they moved to live independently in the community. And we've been doing that kind of work ever since. But we also do some very specialist work, working with people with extreme severe mental illness, who have moved out of locked environments, people coming out of jail and prison. And we do everything from that sort of very high-end stuff through to, which I'm going to talk about today, mental health awareness, health promotion activity, social inclusion, and how you can actually gear your organisation up to be much more effective, both for the people that work for it and also the people that they try to support. So I think, what can the third sector do with the housing sector to develop mental health awareness and a strategy that works for you? So I think both parties need to play to their strengths. I think the third sector brings to the table, certainly Imagine does, years of experience and skills in all things mental well-being and mental ill health. And I think sometimes, as Katie said, it's a bit daunting for people who have come to the table as maybe housing professionals to actually think that they can make a difference, and they're scared of going over the line, giving the wrong advice or doing the wrong thing. So I think that the combination of the two sectors could be really powerful, and the work that Grand Union, Eileen Evans and the Shine a Light campaign has been doing, I think is really an outstanding example of how the two sectors could work better together. But it's about embedding that approach across all the organisations, because housing association land is just so diverse, as is the charity sector. I think one of the things that we bring from a third sector perspective is that understanding of what causes mental ill health and distress, and how it's driven by socioeconomic factors rather than it's a clinical issue all of the time. And it's knowing when to make that call that somebody needs that additional help from clinicians that sometimes people really struggle with. I think one of the things that Imagine's really good at doing is understanding the factors which are driving some of the behaviours which colleagues from housing look at and think, what is it we can do about this? So some of the stuff that housing colleagues deal with on an everyday basis, antisocial behaviour, hoarding, rent arrears, abuse of substances, some of that is actually going to be driven by someone becoming or being mentally unwell. And I think the real special thing that the third sector brings to the table is the ability with some of those people who are your tenants to get a foot in the door and build relationships, because there is always that tension between the housing provider as landlord and housing provider as support provider. And I think working more in partnership, we can deal with some of that tension that's built in to what being a landlord really means. Much more specifically, I think we can help in two ways, and certainly Imagine can, and the sector has this offer there more widely. So one of the things, as per the work that Eileen's been doing, is to develop a mental wellbeing strategy for your staff. That's a given, and particularly as we come out of the pandemic, I think that's going to become even more important if people haven't got that in place. And then I think we can also support the development and delivery of a wellbeing plan for the people that you're actually supporting. So it's knowing what those interventions and those inputs look like that are actually going to be evidence-based and most effective for the people that you're trying to bring change with and for. And why? Well, you know, pre-COVID, the law already said you should be doing some of this stuff. Regulation through the Health and Safety Executive and the government's own paper that was published back in 2017, the Thriving at Work strategy, indicates that every organisation that employs people should have some very basic offers in there. And it's things like a mental health at work plan, how you not only have the policy that says you have a good work-life balance, but how do you actually deliver on that? What support's actually there for your staff? Do you provide in-house support and signpost on to clinical and occupational health services, or do you have an employee assistance program? We do both in Imagine, and I think, you know, it's variable across the sector. I think these are the kind of things that people need to be thinking about. And then going back to Katie's book, do you actually listen to what your employees are telling you? And do you really hear what they're telling you? And what do you do about those messages? So some of what comes through needs to be seen as thematic and responded to, sometimes in real time, and other times it's a much bigger, longer term piece of work. And then you've got to train people. One of the things that Imagine is really keen on doing and does a lot of as part of our mission as a third sector organisation is training. So, you know, you probably will have all heard of mental health first aid, which is the gold standard for training, but you can't train everybody in your organisation to work to that standard, and nor should you try. But you do need some key people, and you need leadership from your exec management teams to embed this. You need some key people who have got the aptitude and the attitude to take this piece of work on, who are there and have got that full training behind them and do the refreshers and keep their knowledge and their practice up to scale. And other people in the organisation know they're the go-to people for extra support around some of the difficult conversations people will be drawn into naturally because of the type of work we do. You also need everybody to have that mental awareness training. And you know, that can be as quick as 2 hours. It can be done online. We're now delivering everything I'm talking about digitally. And you need suicide prevention training and mental well-being promotion training. So how you work needs to focus in, because how you work can make people feel better about themselves, or it can make them feel really rubbish. And I know which I prefer. So it's about actually turning how you do your day-to-day interventions with people into opportunities to promote better mental health and well-being. If you get all of that right, I think you need to keep auditing what you're doing and improving. You need to shape the culture within the organisation, and you need to listen carefully and know when you can deal with things in-house and when you do need that extra additional support. And then you need to live those values. One of the things Imagine does is, as a values-based recruiter, is to actually bring people in who are going to work in the way that we need them to support other people, to realize that they can recover, that things can change and things can be different. And we need to do all of that with kindness and compassion at the center of our approaches. So it's not a quick fix. There's a lot of work in the things I've just suggested, but working together, I think we can make a real difference to people's mental health and well-being across the piece.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Yeah, loads to pick up on there. Yeah, questions about that kind of landlord and support function, I think for me, and also perhaps what the typical picture when it comes to internal policies is like. There's lots to kind of pick up in the conversation that follows. Thank you very much. We've got some questions coming in, but do use that Q&A box. And I should say we've got one from Karen just saying, Katie, thank you for a really helpful presentation. So some nice feedback as well. So thanks, Karen, and yeah, thanks, Margaret, for a great opening presentation as well. Thank you. Right, I will now move on to Andy. Andy, welcome, and yeah, please take things away. It's over to you.
Afternoon, everyone. It is the afternoon now. I'm Andy Sturgis. I'm a specification manager for ACO, but that's beside the point. What I am is actually one of our mental health first aiders for our company. So what I'm kind of going to talk about today is a little bit about what we've done as an organisation, and then kind of bring into a little bit of an element of, from a social housing perspective, the operative end, because we train thousands and thousands of engineers every year, so we speak to them a lot, and often the conversations goes down other routes. Yeah, and to be honest with you, when I was looking through this after I read Katie's book, I actually came out with more questions than actual statements to this. So it'll be interesting to see some of the feedback. But a little bit about what we've been doing as a company. We've basically been heavily on board in regards to the mental health of our colleagues for the last probably year and a half, 2 years now. So we've got four designated mental health first aiders. And to be honest with you, people have only really started to open up it's taken about a year or so. So as Katie already said, it can take time for these things to happen. Colleagues are finally starting to open up and respond to the support we're offering. This is mainly down by building an internal culture of kind of trust and accountability within the business. Now, the reason why I got on board with this is I'm ex-military. I've seen a lot of friends over the years with the very military attitude of not talking at all, and sometimes there's been some pretty bad outcomes from it. And I felt it was pretty close to my heart, which is why I got involved. And one of the key things I took away from Katie's book was kind of like are you sure? There's the general response to a question of how are you? You okay? And it was the yes/no answer. Whereas in reality is just us asking again and making sure that you're aware of people's emotions and kind of listening out to them can really make a difference, because sometimes all it takes is one extra question and you'll get a response. And I've seen that happen quite a few times over the last year or so when I've been in my role. Yeah, off the back of that, I can talk about the training element. So we deal with a lot of the operatives, from a social housing perspective. Thousands of them over the year. But I think personally, just this year alone, I've trained nearly 600 engineers, not necessarily across social housing, but in all manners of engineering. And one of the key questions I really want to ask is, obviously a lot of organisations, you are allowing your engineers, you're allowing your staff and your colleagues to undertake mental health awareness training. Obviously, not everyone's going to do the mental health first aid course. It's quite an involved course, and not everyone's going to do it, as Margaret quite accurately said. But once you've made them aware of potential mental health problems, be it with their own colleagues or with the residents that they look after, are they actually given enough time to apply this? Because as we've already said from the start, there's no real skill required in needing to listen. The shush tips are great, but you don't need to be trained on how to listen. You just need to be kind of aware of what you need to look out for and how to respond to it. And the question I really had for everyone was, do you actually give them the time to do it? It's a very KPI heavy industry. They've got to be in the properties. They've got stuff to do. They've got to go to their next jobs. They've got to get out and about. But if, for example, they are chatting away to a resident and they feel that they need to talk to them, or that the resident has hard to open up with them and they want to have a conversation, do they have the capability to go, no, I can't move on to that job yet. I'm going to stay here for another half hour. I'm going to have a chat with this resident because they're engaging with me, and it's clearly making them feel better. Can I actually apply the awareness that you've given me? Because a lot of the time I feel is that you have the message, you have your goals and what you want to achieve, and you understand the reasons why you want to do it with your residents, but are you actually allowing your staff to to do it, to utilize it. And the other one that I wanted to kind of bring up was, do you actually explain the reasoning behind it? You know, you've got a mental health awareness scheme. You know, you've decided, well, for this year, this is what I'm going to focus on. This is what we're going to do as an organisation. Do you actually explain the reasoning behind it to your colleagues, to your operatives, or are they just told, well, this is what you got to do? Because sometimes they might not understand why they're doing it or the reasoning behind it. And a lot of the time, if you know, I'm a practical person, I need to be given a goal. I need to be given something that I want to achieve or something that I need to do. And I feel that sometimes the message goes out that, you know, this is what we're trying to achieve, but they don't actually get told why or how they're going to do it. So I think that's quite important. Another thing we do a lot of resident engagement. You know, our predominant sector, as it were, because we're a manufacturer. Our predominant element is safety and well-being. You know, those are the two key things we focus on. And so we do a lot of engagement with residents. Now, what we see is you get a massive different response depending on where you are and what you're doing, as we all know, with the different demographics around the country. And what we do find is that a lot of time residents do genuinely care about each other, you know, especially in close local communities. They build good, strong relationships with their neighbours. And I mean, we do a lot of fire awareness training. So we go in there, we'll do engagement days, and we'll have people come up and they won't really care about their own safety, but they'll be like, oh, well, I've got a neighbour. I think she's not very well, or she's elderly, and we want to. You know, I want to know what I need to do if there's a fire to help her get out the property, for example. So there's a genuine care there, and what I feel is something that should be focused on is kind of resident pride and engagement from that element, and getting them involved and making them a little bit aware of it, to be honest with you. Because I mean, obviously you see adverts on the TV, you see charity awareness, things like that, but actually engaging with your residents on a level where you're actually going, well, you know, this is your community, these people are living in your community, you know, we as a housing provider care about your community because, one, we want to, and two, you know, it's part of our job. But again, are you giving them the tools? You know, something like 10-minute conversations about Katie's book, about shush, things like that. That's going to benefit everyone. It's not just going to benefit your colleagues or your operatives or internally. It can also help your residents as well. And as we all know, all it takes is one person being aware at the correct point in time to potentially kind of avert the worst case scenario. Yeah, I mean, that's some of the key points I wanted to cover. There's a few open-ended questions there that people might want to answer in the chat, but I think the key takeaways that I've taken from all of this over the last year or so, when I've been heavily involved in it, is that you don't actually need to be skilled at all to help someone. You don't need to have to worry about having all this training, as long as Casey, you don't try and offer them advice or you try and tell them what to do. All it does take is to listen to potentially help someone out pretty massively.
Thanks very much, Andy. Yeah, a really thoughtful presentation, and yeah, a lot to pick up on as we move forwards. And we've got a number of questions starting to pop up in the Q&A box. Just a reminder that absolutely this is about practical takeaways for you and your organisation. So do use the opportunity to pose the questions, and hopefully we'll give you some practical tips and answers from the panel to take away and think about in your own organisations. So yeah, do keep them coming in. Thank you very much, and yeah, great presentation, Andy. Thank you very much for that. Right, Amy, welcome, and yeah, the floor is yours. Please take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Okay, so I'm bringing the perspective really of the housing provider to this debate, and this is such an interesting area, and there's such a lot going on. It's great to see so many webinars and activities like this that are highlighting the importance of mental health for our staff and for our customers. As housing providers, we're already doing a lot to support our customers, identify needs, try and get support. And we know that lots of the statutory agencies are really overloaded, and this is quite a challenge for them and for us. And like a lot of providers at Raven, we've got a number of programs and activities in place already that we're already using to support customers. And we have mental health first aiders and other things in place to support our staff as well. But what we've got is a real opportunity with the increase in the prominence in this, for example, in the white paper, to review what we're doing and bring it together in a cohesive strategy, both within our organisations and actually sector-wide. And we're really good at working collaboratively. So this is a fantastic opportunity for us to do that, really. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just broadly think about how this fits together as a pattern. And I think it fits across 4 themes when we think about ourselves as housing providers. And the first one for me is how we build that deeper relationship of trust with our customers, because that's really critical to getting that understanding, to being able to put the right things in place, put the right strategies in place to support our customers. So the first one is building a deeper relationship. The second thing for me is listening to understand. And that really comes back to the themes that Katie's focusing on and that she talks about in the book, about being open to hear. So listening to understand, not to reply. We want to just give the answer, but we need to take more time to understand what's going on with our customers. And I think the third point for me, the third theme, is about partnerships. And Margaret highlighted this when she was talking about how we can work together with other organisations and with other sectors, because we don't have all the answers. We're not the experts. We can't do this alone, but we absolutely have a role to play. And we know that the importance of home, of safety, security in someone's mental health is vitally important. And that's the role that's part of what we bring. And I think the fourth theme for me is about us having a holistic, person-centered approach. So what I'm just going to do is rattle through a couple of slides to highlight some examples of how this might look. So that's about me. That's about Raven. We're a medium-sized housing association. We're not huge. We've got about 7,000 homes across the southeast, but we're quite diverse. We do lots of different things. So just thinking about how we build that deeper relationship of trust, it's about culture, it's about values. And Martin highlighted all of the proactive work that we all did during COVID about contacting our customers. And what we've really noticed, and I'm sure others have too, is that the way we provide services, the care, the proactive "are you okay" has become much more important than the thing we're delivering. So the conversation might be about a repair, but the other checks and questions we're asking are the things that are making the difference to how people feel and how people are managing, and certainly have had more prominence over the last few months. So I like a picture. So we've got the top picture here is Lou and Christine, 2 of our customers. Christine in the blue was isolated in her property. We didn't know anything that was going on with her, wheelchair bound, couldn't manage. And we called her to see how she was. And the way she was feeling and not managing all came out. We were able to put some things in place to help her. We helped her moved into a sheltered scheme and made friends with Lou. And it's changed both of their lives. They're no longer isolated. Christine's not stuck in her home. And her mental health, her well-being, she was talking about having dark thoughts and not having a reason to live. And it's completely turned it around. And that's massive when we have that role to play, the difference we make. And the other thing I just wanted to highlight here is about when we start to think about listening to understand, we've trained our frontline operatives, and Andy was talking about this and how you can involve your teams. What we haven't trained them to be experts, but we've trained them to look and listen. So look out for things that don't look right. Is the customer looking after themselves? Is the property hoarded? Are there things there that make you concerned, like someone talks for them, they're not able to speak for themselves? What does a property condition look like? What can you pick up? We were previously hearing things from our operatives like, oh, something's not quite right, but I don't know what to do. Or, well, I didn't want to get them into trouble by saying something. So by equipping them with, this is stuff you can physically look at, this is things to listen out for, and giving them an easy way to report that through has made a really big difference. And I just want to highlight something we've done around hoarding in a moment, which will illustrate this point. The other area is community investment, and lots of you, same as Raven, undertake activity in this space. And this is where we really need to think about partnerships. Lots of the activity we undertake, we don't do on our own. So we have a homelessness prevention service that works across 4 districts and boroughs and is funded partly by one of the county councils. So we're not trying to do it on our own, but we're trying to provide the right support, tenure blind, across 4 areas. We have funds that people can access. So the top right picture there is a van that we bought for one of our food banks during COVID, and we're working in partnerships. So the thank you card relates to our Level Up digital partnership, where we're working with local volunteers and companies to refurbish old computers, old laptops. We gave out 500 to school children, which is just making such a difference. It did make such a difference when people were homeschooling. So there's lots of different activities there, but we're not trying to do that alone. And a lot of those things come along with counselling activity as well. So we have a Pathways to Employment project, and that project is looking at people who are a long way from employment. So it's not really just about getting them into work, it's about getting underneath why they're struggling. And there's a lot there around anxiety, confidence, depression that we can support people to manage. And I think the final sort of area I just wanted to highlight was to think about this holistic person-centered approach, and to share with you some work that we did around hoarding. So we know this is a really complex issue, something that costs housing providers a fortune to deal with. And it's often driven by something negative, neighbours complaining, fire risk, we can't get in to do a repair. And so the start of our conversation with a customer about it is from a bad place, it's from a negative place, and it's often something they're already struggling to admit. So we kind of flipped this around and took a different approach and started with what's going on with this customer. How can we personalize the way we manage this? How can we tailor our approach, and how can we focus on them and what they need? So we worked with a hoarding disorder specialist, and we moved from it all being about spend the money, clear the property, recharge the customer, to how can we get this person counselling support? How can we understand what's causing their hoarding disorder? And how can we work with them on an individual plan to kind of deal with this and make it enable them to manage with support to try and recover from this? And it's massively changed the relationship we have with customers who hoard. So we're not taking enforcement action. It's cheaper, it's better business sense, because we're not having all the costs in clearance and recharges that you never recover. But the main thing is it's building this longer term relationship of trust with our customers. So later on, if something goes wrong, they are more likely to come back to us for help. We're getting to understand the root of the problem more successfully, and it's really, again, having that long-term, much better mental health outcome for those customers. The picture here is Chrissy. We did a video with Chrissy and our hoarding disorder specialist, a lady called Heather, and that's available on YouTube. We'll share the link with you afterwards. It's about 10 minutes and it's Chrissy's story. And I think, we can talk about numbers, we can talk about programs that we have, but this is all about the people and the difference that we're making to individual lives. This story, it's quite an emotional one. It's about 10 minutes long, but it really does bring to life what's underneath this and why we're trying to help, and what we perhaps as providers can do to think differently in this space. Thank you. That's me.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Yeah, a huge amount to pick up on there. And yeah, I mean, a kind of interesting kind of touch on those kind of landlord and care functions as well, which I think will kind of come support functions that we'll come back to also, because a couple of people have mentioned that in the presentations. We've got questions coming in. Do keep them coming in, and I will make sure we get through as many as possible. We've got about 20 minutes left for questions, so do keep them coming in. And I'm going to move straight to one of the questions that have been submitted. And just a reminder that obviously that this hopefully can be useful to you in your thinking and informing your approach moving forwards. But a question coming in from Lisa. From WCHG. Welcome, Lisa. Thanks for the question. And it's interesting. A lot of the conversations we've been having have been about, and actually the approach that I launched in with was about landlords and tenants, and that kind of support relationship. But Lisa's question is: do you think that training some of our tenants to be mental health first aiders could work to support others in the community? So we've been talking about kind of, if you like, housing professionals and tenants, but what about that kind of role of tenants and community support networks? So Margaret, I might move to you first, and then to Katie, and I'll bring the panel in on that. Yeah, Margaret, over to you, and just a reminder, do keep those questions coming in.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's an absolutely great idea. One of the things that Imagine does a lot of work with are peer support networks. And I think sometimes it's much easier for somebody to approach someone that looks and sounds like them and has had some similar experiences and can come alongside them than it is to approach somebody that appears to be a professional or works for your landlord or for another agency that you maybe suspect. Certainly for people who are seriously mentally ill, you may suspect that if you engage with a professional you might end up being readmitted to hospital. So I think there's a lot of value in that kind of approach. Certainly, we train lots of volunteers in mental health first aid, and they work with the people who are on our services. But equally, I think you do need to think through what the support for those people is. And you need to put in some wraparound support so that if they themselves begin to struggle, particularly if it's someone that's got lived experience, you're not actually going to be putting them into a situation that exacerbates their own mental ill health. So I think there's lots we could do, and it would be the next step, I think, from the work of Shine a Light to actually get some residents and tenants engaged in this agenda.
Thanks very much, Margaret. And Katie, I'm going to move to you with that question, and perhaps some of the thoughts that Margaret just raised there about the kind of level of support then that might need to be in place. So you're talking about so again that question about tenants to be mental health first aiders and training, what other levels of support might need to be put in place to enable that to happen? And do you think that's kind of an appropriate approach? So Katie, over to you.
Yeah, I do. I totally agree with everything that Margaret said. I think one really important thing about the Samaritans service that makes it so unique is that it's completely confidential. You're never going to meet the person that you're talking to. You don't see them. It's completely non-confrontational, and there's a lot of comfort in that. And so I can see that a lot of people come through to us are nervous about confidentiality, for example. So I can see how there would be a kind of nervousness, particularly with mental illness, about what then happens in terms of the system. I think it's important to note that Samaritans aren't trained counsellors. They're not psychotherapists. They are normal people doing something incredible. So it's testament that it can work. And I think there's a lot of systems that we have in place. For example, when you go on shift, you check in with your shift leader. When you finish your shift, you debrief. So everything that we keep is basically so that we don't take away the weight of the world on our shoulders. It would be extraordinarily difficult if you didn't learn how to process leaving a call, not knowing the outcome of the call, and then leaving your branch and going home. It's a difficult thing to do, but actually it's very possible. And I really like the idea of peer-to-peer. Lots of people that become Samaritans volunteers are people that have gone through something themselves. So they automatically have a certain level of empathy where they feel it's a genuine privilege because they've been in a similar situation. So they're waiting for a call so that they can say to that. They know the process. They know what's going to be important to that person who's making the call. So there is a real sense of empathy in shared experience.
Thanks very much, and I will move to you very quickly, Amy, to talk, because I'm interested in your experience. But very quickly before I do, while we still got you, Katie, Mandy from Notting Hill Genesis was just what one point I think missed in the presentation, but just a very quick answer. What does the E in fine stand for? I missed it during the presentation earlier. So Katie, if you can just remind us.
Oh yeah, so fine, yeah. If someone says that they're fine, it stands for freaked out, insecure, neurotic, or emotional.
Thank you very much. So yeah, a straightforward response to that question. Thank you very much, Amy. I'll bring you in at this stage because that question about the kind of training tenants to be mental health first aiders. I just wonder whether that's an approach you've looked at, tried, what your reaction is to it as a housing provider, and where that kind of fits with your thinking.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. It's a really good question. And I would say it's a question that we're sort of grappling with. It's not something that we have done so far. It is a conversation we started with some of our involved customers to get a sense of how people feel. And I think there are a number of factors here. So the worries that our involved customers have about potentially getting involved in this area are having the resources and support and training to feel confident to do so. The fear that the worry that people might not want to talk to their neighbours or people that they know. And then what if something really horrible comes to light? What do I do and where do I go? And I think all of these things are surmountable. And I definitely think that there is a benefit of having someone who's not a professional from an organisation and somebody who would have a similar, potentially similar lived experience. So I can see a lot of potential here, but I think for us, it would need quite a lot of thorough exploration and some good training and support in place. And I think one of the things that resonates as well is Katie's point about the volunteers at Samaritans getting that opportunity to debrief. And we'd need to think about how to manage that as well to support those volunteers.
Thanks very much. Really thoughtful response, and interesting to hear it from that kind of provider perspective as well. Whether that kind of interesting, that's something that feels like it's worthy of further exploration. So thanks very much, and thanks Lisa for really great question. I hope that's kind of given a thorough answer. Andy, I'm going to move on, but if you want to address that issue, then do feel free to come in on it as well. So a couple of things. I'm going to move to another question, but just very quickly before we do that, Jordan for Homelink has written in just a good news story rather than a question. Relates to Andy's point around giving operatives time to use their mental health first aid training. We completed a project with a large local authority recently, and the disclosure was made to the engineer. He made the right decision to stay with that resident in that scenario, potentially save the life. So just some thoughts from Jordan there. And actually relating to a few discussion points and questions that have been coming in, and from Anka Hanover, welcome Anne, just has said that making every contact count can be a quick, simple way to identify issues and refer people. So that's kind of, as we talked about, kind of everyday interactions. Interesting your thoughts about how that's worked for you as an organisation, and any questions you might have about kind of next steps. So yeah, please keep using the Q&A if there's anything you want to kind of take away from that or contribute to the debate. But thank you very much for that. I'm just going to come very quickly to, as I bring you in, Andy, to that work I mentioned earlier about the Centre for Mental Health, suggesting that 10 million people in England will need support for their mental health as a direct result of the pandemic over the next 3 to 5 years. Kind of those figures aside, clearly it's going to be a very substantial number of people. What does that tell us about the level of resource needed, and how should that be shaping organisations and individual responses? And I'm coming to you first on that, Andy, because I think you were talking about the importance of explaining the reasoning behind kind of the approach organisations are taking. I guess that's part of it, but if you can enlarge about how best to explain that reasoning and that kind of scale of challenge as well, whether organisations are kind of geared up for that. So yeah, Andy, over to you.
Well, I think it very much, it obviously depends on your goal, and it depends on an individual. So I think it's more down to learning style, how people apply information. I think the general kind of like atmosphere, as it were, or the general kind of reasoning I see from operatives is a lot of the time is they'll get given objectives by chief execs, by the CEO, by whoever's running the organisation. And to them, all they feel like it's additional work. That's what they feel. Even if someone well-being, whereas it's just more work to do. And that's not necessarily an issue, because obviously, there's a reasoning behind it. But the point I think I was more trying to raise was that certain people respond to different inputs and different reasoning behind things. So, and I know it sounds a little mercenary, but for example, if you go, well, one of the reasons why we're trying to reduce this, for example, is because, well, in reality, yes, obviously it's going to be brilliant for the residents. We're looking to protect them, but it'll also make this more efficient, or it'll stop us having to do this. And some people respond better to objective-based input, or they'll respond better to visual things, for example, rather than just having an email from someone saying, this is some training, go on the training, now you're aware. And I mean, personally, if that was me, I'd be like, oh, great. That would be my response. Whereas if I've got someone explaining the reasoning behind it, I mean, if anything, a lot of people respond, people are empathetic. So if someone goes, well, this is why it's going to help people. This could stop this happening. This could stop this happening. This could make this person's life better in this way. And sometimes that's all it takes, because as I say, I do hundreds and hundreds of operatives every year. And a lot of them genuinely do care about the residents where they work and in the properties where they work, but some don't. It's a harsh fact of the matter. Some really don't. And don't get me wrong, 100% of the people, 100% of the time aren't going to. But if you kind of go through the process of explaining it in more detail, or giving them the purpose behind what you're doing, I think it'll get a lot more people on board and make it a lot more positive.
Thanks very much, Andy. And Katie, I'm going to come to you next with that question. So about the kind of level of resource that might be needed, whether in your experience, people are kind of aware of quite what that might entail, and how they should be preparing in their own organisations. But I'm gonna so kind of park that for a second, but do come back to it. And I'm going to throw in a question from David from Agilum Homes. And he's saying, I currently manage a 64-bed complex needs homeless centre. We have a robust mental health intervention programme within the service, although theory and practicality don't always work. What other new interventions could be used to identify the potential root cause of mental health stressors within our cohort? So, what other techniques could they be using? And Katie, that question about resource as well. So how well prepared do the other organisations you're coming into contact with seem to be, and how should that be influencing people's thinking? So Katie, over to you.
Yeah, so I mean, I would kind of urge everyone to get in touch with Samaritans' workplace training team, because we do run bespoke and general workplace training depending on what the need is. So we go, like, for example, Network Rail, we've got a huge partnership where we will train staff in very, very specific areas. It's very research based. And then we have a much more general workplace training scheme, which is around shops, basically, how staff in retail can respond and have a better understanding of mental health. So that's the first thing I would say. I think what's sorry, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I think one of the important things that we do in workplace training at Samaritans is make it completely non-clinical and non-jargonified, and where there are lots of very psychological terms around flourishing and languishing mental wellness, we kind of just ditch all of that, and we have something called the emotional well-being scale, which is like, I call it the doorstop wedge. If you imagine a triangle, shaped like a doorstop, and in the top, the fat end of the wedge, you imagine yourself as somebody who's going about the day and they're coping, and everyone's in equal balance. Then something in your life might happen where you fall down further and further down the wedge. So you might lose your job, and then that affects your finances, and the loss of your job and your finances affects your relationship, and then you lose your relationship, and then you lose your home, and then you lose custody of your children, and then your toaster explodes and you phone Samaritans because you are in absolute crisis point because of all of these different factors that have sent you further and further down the wedge. Obviously, usually your toaster exploding would be annoying, but it wouldn't be a catastrophe. But it is a catastrophe if everything else has snowballed and you've lost your general sense of being able to use the logical, rational part of your brain, and everything is feeling very chaotic. And I think sometimes explaining things in a totally non-medical, non-psychological, non-systems-based way can be the key to saying, we all have emotional well-being, we all have mental health, and every single day we are on a continually sliding scale, this continuum of the wedge. You can go up and down it every single day. You can go up and down it every single hour, depending on what is happening in your life at that moment. So when there are big things going on in people's lives, inequality is a big issue. So when there are lots of big life events, it's quite a nice way of simplifying how to explain it to somebody that completely reduces the stigma around mental illness that unfortunately still exists.
Thank you very much. Sorry, just lost mute for a second there. Thank you very much. That's a really thorough answer. And I want to kind of pick up on a couple of points you made in that answer. And I might move to Margaret to do that, but maybe just some quick thoughts there, because I think there's, and then Amy, I'll come to you, but there was in Amy's in the presentation earlier from Margaret, I think there was that talk about the kind of landlord and support functions that a lot of our audience and readers would have, and how the support function, or some of the questions that raised for me was how the support function should influence the landlord function. And Amy, I think, mentioned in her presentation briefly kind of eviction prevention. That clearly is one area where you can kind of quite clearly see a kind of direct impact on people's mental health. So I just wonder how that support function should be influencing the landlord function, and what the landlord function at the minute, particularly given the current set of circumstances, should be, how they should be approaching things like eviction prevention and things like that. So Margaret, I'll come to you on that first, if that's okay, and then I'll move to Amy perhaps. So Margaret, over to you.
Yeah, I think everything's contextual. So at the moment, if landlords were to, sort of take a stricter line on evictions, for example, the external environment is not that beneficial to people, and the particular types of people that we're focused on who have severe mental illness would find it extremely difficult to find alternative accommodation. And so, you are actually going to start generating increasing numbers of people living on the streets, or worse in terms of their response to losing that security. And I think it was Katie that made the point that security that comes from having a forever home where you're safe, that the rug isn't going to be pulled under you, is really, really vital to somebody's sense of self and how they approach the rest of their life. I think the other thing to point out, and it was the question about from a colleague from the Adullam Homes about working with homeless people, is that in Imagine, we take the approach that nothing is too good for the people we support. So everybody has their own front door, their own private facilities, and we aspire to have really high quality environments for people to live in, therapeutic environments if at all possible, because that is such a valuable way of supporting people to thrive and flourish. And I think the ongoing conversation, sometimes eviction can seem it's a one-stick answer. It can seem a really easy approach, particularly to some private landlords. Actually, it's not the right thing to do on a number of fronts, and there can be other solutions. And I think the third sector can get really, involved and support those organisations that maybe have a lower risk appetite for sticking in there with people with mental illness. There is a role for us to play in that arena.
Thanks very much, Margaret. Really interesting answer. And Amy, I'm aware that we're pretty much out of time. So just very quickly, I think it would be good to get that kind of provider perspective there as well. So this kind of interaction between the support side of a landlord and the landlord function, if you like, and perhaps the approach to evictions. So so sorry, we're almost out of time. So a relatively quick response, but if you wouldn't mind just kind of giving us some thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. So there's a couple of things. It makes good business sense to put people into an environment that enables them to thrive. It's putting cost and resources into the front end, setting people up in the right way, giving them support to settle in. We don't want to be spending money dealing with breaches. We want to be spending money and investing in things that work well for people. So things like our eviction support service has supported 1,200 people, mostly private land tenants, but some housing association over the last 8 years, and we've prevented hundreds of evictions. So the better business outcomes with the right focus really is what I would say. And I think also the example of the last year and what's happened since COVID gives us an opportunity to resource things differently and invest in different opportunities. So self-service tools, digital and online, which has been a massive increase and a bit of a channel shift for lots and lots of people over the last year. So I think there are different ways to provide that support with partners, but bottom line, makes good business sense to invest in the right things.
Thanks very much, Amy. And I'm afraid we have run out of time, unfortunately. Really, the fantastic presentations, really thought-provoking, and certainly a lot of takeaways for me, and I hope for the audience as well. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you for some great questions, which did provoke a really good debate and discussion. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you to our fantastic panelists for those great presentations and thoughtful responses to those questions. And thank you also to ACO and HomeLink for sponsoring and making this event possible. So thank you all. And all that remains for me to do is to bring things to a close. Say I hope that's been useful for you all, and see you all very soon. Thank you.